In 1970, General Motors had a rule, a hard limit. No engine over 400 cubic inches was allowed in a car this size. It wasn't a suggestion, it was corporate policy, enforced from the top down. And then Oldsmobile built this, a 455 cubic inch monster sitting in a car that, by GM's own law, wasn't supposed to exist. Today we're opening the case file on the car that broke its own company's rules, and the paper trail that proves exactly how they got away with it. By the end of this video, you'll know why the horsepower number on the window sticker was a lie, why insurance companies are the real villain of this story, and why one specific year of this car is now worth more than most people's houses. The 442 didn't start as a legend. It started as a $285 option box you could check on an Oldsmobile F85 or Cutlass back in 1964. A name derived from a 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust. The package was built to compete directly with the Pontiac GTO, but Oldsmobile had a reputation problem. This was the brand your grandfather drove. Oldsmobile had spent decades establishing itself as an upscale brand built on luxury, comfort, and reliability, not rebellion. Nobody expected a powerhouse to come out of this particular factory. That mismatch between expectation and reality is exactly why the 442 became known as a sleeper. By 1968, the option had grown into something bigger. The 442 became its own standalone model, built on GM's body platform alongside the Chevelle SS, the GTO, and the Buick GS. And tucked inside that lineup was a special order code that hardcore enthusiasts started to whisper about, W30. Here's where the real story starts. For years, General Motors had an internal rule, never written into any law, but enforced like one, capping engine displacement in intermediate-sized cars at 400 cubic inches. It was meant to keep mid-size muscle cars from becoming too dangerous, too fast, too much of a liability. Then, in 1970, that rule simply vanished. General Motors lifted the corporate ban on engines larger than 400 cubic inches in mid-size models, and Oldsmobile didn't hesitate. The division immediately made its big block 455 cubic inch V8 the standard engine for the 442. But here's the detail almost nobody talks about. Oldsmobile had already been quietly working around this exact rule for 2 years. In 1968 and 1969, Oldsmobile had bypassed GM's displacement mandate entirely through a special agreement with Hurst Performance, creating the high-performance Hurst/Olds, a 455-powered car that technically existed outside the corporate rulebook. When the official ban lifted in 1970, Oldsmobile wasn't improvising. They'd already proven the engine worked. They were just waiting for permission to do it publicly, so GM's rule was gone. Oldsmobile had the green light, the engine, and the car. Case closed, right? Well, here's the twist. The number Oldsmobile put on the window sticker wasn't the truth. The 1974 42 W30 was officially rated at 370 gross horsepower, a perfectly respectable number, competitive even, but according to people who've spent decades researching this exact engine, that number was never the full story. The W30's true output was actually a little over 400 horsepower, and one of the most detailed breakdowns of the math comes from automotive writer Roger Huntington, who in the early 1970s directly compared advertised numbers to real-world testing. His findings on the 1970 W30 manual transmission engine, an advertised rating of 370 horsepower against an actual output of 440 horsepower. That's not a rounding error. That's a 70 horsepower gap between what Oldsmobile told the public and what the engine actually produced. And once you understand why, the entire story of this car changes. Why would a car company deliberately undersell its own engine? The answer isn't marketing, it's money. And it's not Oldsmobile's money. By the start of the 1970s, insurance companies had declared war on muscle cars. Horsepower-based premium surcharges were becoming standard, and the higher the number on the spec sheet, the more it cost an everyday buyer to insure the car they just financed. Rising insurance rates were already squeezing demand for performance cars across the entire industry, and automakers knew that a smaller number on paper meant a smaller bill in the mailbox, which meant more cars sold. This wasn't even new behavior for GM corporately. Enthusiasts who've spent years pulling apart the actual engineering data point to a damning piece of internal logic. GM reportedly enforced an unofficial limit of 10 pounds of curb weight per horsepower on its A-body cars. The 1974 42 weighed right around 3,700 pounds. Do the math, and a 370 horsepower rating lines up suspiciously well with that formula. Regardless of what the engine engine could actually produce. In other words, the horsepower number wasn't measured. It was calculated backward from a corporate weight formula designed to keep the car under an internal ceiling. If the number on paper was fiction, the hardware under the hood was not. The W30 package wasn't a sticker and a stripe. It included a fiberglass hood with functional ram air induction, plastic inner fenders to save weight, and an aluminum differential carrier. Every component chosen to shave pounds and feed the engine more cold air. Under that hood sat a 455 cubic inch V8 that had been specially blueprinted, meaning every internal component was hand matched for optimal performance rather than mass assembled like a standard engine. This wasn't cosmetic performance. A 442 W30 could hit 60 miles per hour in 5.7 seconds and complete the quarter mile in 14.2 seconds at 100 miles per hour. Numbers that, even at the supposedly modest 370 horsepower rating, were already competitive with the fastest cars in America. With the real output closer to 400 or even 440 horsepower, the W30 wasn't just keeping pace with legends. It may have been quietly beating them while wearing a corporate badge that screamed comfortable family coupe. Here's the part of the story that makes this car genuinely strange. This wasn't built for street racers. Despite its youth appeal, many 1974 Ford II W30 buyers were actually older than the typical muscle car customer and tended to sit higher on the socioeconomic ladder. Oldsmobile buyers expected comfort, not just speed, and Oldsmobile gave it to them. While competing muscle car buyers often opted for stripped-down, bare-bones cars, Oldsmobile buyers went the opposite direction, loading their cars with options. That's how the 442 W30 earned its nickname in enthusiast circles, the Hemi Killer, a car that could humiliate Mopar's most feared engine on the strip, while its driver wore a sport coat and parked it outside a country club. It became known as the gentleman's muscle car, performance hiding in plain sight, disguised by exactly the brand reputation that should have made it the least threatening car on the road. If this car was so capable, why isn't it as famous as the Chevelle SS or the GTO? The answer is scarcity, and scarcity born from exactly the forces we've been talking about. Oldsmobile produced only 3,100 W30s in 1970 across all body styles, with just 264 convertibles ever built, and the window for this specific car was brutally short. By 1971, rising insurance costs and tightening regulations had already begun squeezing demand for the package. That same year, a new federal requirement forced unleaded fuel compatibility across the industry, dropping the 455's compression ratio from 10.5 to 1 down to just 8.5 to 1, gutting the very performance that made the W30 special in the first place. The 1970 W30 wasn't just a great muscle car, it was a closing door. You're the single peak moment before insurance companies, emissions regulators, and GM's own corporate caution combined to end the era for good. That scarcity is exactly why this car commands real money today. A 1974 Ford II W30 in good condition is valued at roughly $71,400, with values climbing over 4% in the past year alone, and the rare convertible version reaching closer to $91,900. This is a car that GM's own rulebook said shouldn't exist at this size, with a horsepower number on the window sticker that was never the truth. Built for buyers, nobody expected to want it, and it nearly vanished entirely within 2 model years. That's not just a muscle car, that's a 5-year window where Detroit briefly stopped playing by its own rules. If you caught the shorts on this channel over the past 2 weeks, you already saw pieces of this case file. If you want to keep digging through automotive history that the manufacturers themselves tried to bury, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next case file starts soon, and this one might be even harder to believe. Drop a comment if you've ever seen a real W30 in person. I want to hear where it's hiding.